Hi all, a very good morning. So quickly I'll sign into my console. Can you guys help me with the topic that we did last class? Okay. So in the last part of our lab, we learned about what is EFS, that is Elastic File System, and with the help of Elastic File System, what can we do across? So we have certain advantages like the size of the file system will grow as and when the items are added to it, and it will automatically shrink as and when the items are also removed from the same drive. Now the other most advantage that we get with the help of EFS is all about I can share the same file system with not one, not two, but tens, hundreds, and thousands of EC2 instances at the same time. So the EFS is really a powerful file system which helps us to reduce the cost significantly as well help us share the file system across the multiple virtual servers. And then in the last part, we also learned across what is load balancer. So as a part of a load balancer, we learned how does the load actually get balanced in the real-time world. So usually there are multiple copies of the same server in the different availability zones as a part of highly available architecture. And any of the whenever the load specifically increases on this, the load balancer is going to automatically transfer the requests to the specific virtual servers behind it. So here if you see the example that is being displayed on the screen, here is my load balancer which has got multiple EC2 instances running beneath it, and automatically the load on each of them is balanced upon the number of requests that my load balancer is going to get through. In the part of today's lab, we are going to learn about auto scaling. So how does the auto scaling work and what does it actually do across? So I'll quickly navigate back to my console. I'll click on the services and then go down to the EC2 section. So on the left hand side of the screen, if you scroll down, you'll be also able to see the auto scaling groups in the part of auto scaling section. But before that, I'm quickly going to go ahead and launch one more load balancer. So we'll quickly review what we learned in the last part in terms of the load balancer. I'll pick up the classic load balancer in this case. I'll go ahead and say my classic LB. This is going to be a part of default VPC, and this is not an internal load balancer. This is going to be exposed to the end users. And listener configuration, I'm going to keep it at HTTP port number 80, and the instance protocol is also going to be port number 80. And I'm going to keep it behind the web server security group, which has got HTTP and HTTPS ports opened up. I'll go ahead and add the configuration settings. Since we are using the HTTP protocol, we do not have any secure listeners at this point of time. And I'll go and configure the health check. So as a part of health check, I'm going to check out for the healthy.html. And I'll keep the interval for the smaller time, 10 seconds, and the healthy threshold to be the 3, so that my load balancer is in active or in service mode at very soon. Right, so I have kept HTTP port number 80, and the ping path is going to be healthy.html. Response timeout 5 seconds, interval is going to be 10 seconds, and the unhealthy threshold to be 2 and healthy to be 3. I'll quickly go and add instances. So currently I do not have any, so I'll just enable the cross zone load balancing and the enable connection training. I'll ensure that they are checked across. I'll go ahead and add the tags. I'll say name, my classic LB, and then just review and create. So here we go ahead and create a load balancer. So for the auto scaling lab to be done, we need a load balancer behind the scene. So first we have actually created a load balancer. Now let's come down to the auto scaling groups. So I'm here in my home page of the auto scaling group, and it gives me an option to create an auto scaling group. So before we go ahead and create auto scaling group, let's learn about it. What does it say? You can use the auto scaling to manage EC2 capacity automatically, right? So the capacity of our EC2 instances, we are going to manage them with the help of this auto scaling groups. Maintain the right number of instances for your application, operate healthy group of instances, and scale it according to your needs. So the really important is, whenever I go with the auto scaling, it helps me to put through what are the minimum number of instances required for my application to run. Let's say I want to have a highly available architecture, and I want that always 2 instances should be running, so that in two different availability zones, so that even if one of them goes down, I'll still have the users being able to redirect it to other one. So if I'm saying 2, that is a number of instances always running. So that capacity I can define it with the help of auto scaling. So it is going to help me maintain the right number of instances for my application to run always. And it always, in terms of auto scaling, the one good thing is it operates only healthy group of instances. So in case if there is any instance that is actually not responding or has gone down due to some other reason, automatically the auto scaling groups are going to help me add the new EC2 instance, which is healthy and serving the purpose, right? So auto scaling is always going to operate healthy group of instances, and it is actually going to scale according to your needs. So if there is an increase in the load, automatically it is going to launch a new instance. If there is a decrease in the load, automatically it's going to decrease the instances as well. So let's go ahead and check out what all we can do with it. So the moment I go ahead and click on create auto scaling group, it does show me that there are two different steps. One is creating a launch configuration and creating a auto scaling group. So before we create an auto scaling group, first thing is we need to choose a template that your auto scaling group will use when it launches the instances for you. Now, if you look at this specific diagram, the second part, here it actually says there is a graph and there are certain number of users who are accessing my servers. So, and there's a line here, if you see orange color line that has been put across in between, which is basically saying that there is a minimum number of instances that should be always running. So if you see here, I have kept it minimum as 2. So 2 instances will always be running. Whatever might be the case, they'll be running all across. So when the users are normal, it will be serving with the help of 2 EC2 instances. Now whenever the number of users are increasing, my instances are added automatically. But when these instances are all added automatically, the new instance should have the configuration as same as the existing ones. So how do we do that specific case? So for that, we specifically have this launch configuration, which is going to help me out with the same configuration of the existing running instance to be launched with. Now, whenever again users are going to decrease, automatically it is going to remove the instances. Now, again, if you see, it has come back to 2 instances. And sometimes system might get corrupted or there might be some problems that the existing instance may go down. But again, automatically, auto scaling group, as we just discussed a couple of minutes back, it maintains the right number of instances, whatever might be the case, along with the all healthy instances in the group. So even if one of them gets corrupted or one of them goes down due to some problem, the other one gets added automatically with the help of this auto scaling group. And again, if the users are going to increase, it is again going to add the new EC2 instances in this case here. So the first thing is we have to define the template. So the template that the auto scaling group will use to launch the instances. So whenever a new instance has to be launched automatically, there should be some template on the basis of which the new instance will be launched so that it matches the production environment. And second step here we are doing is auto scaling group. So in auto scaling group, we are going to define all these parameters. What is the minimum number of instances required? On what basis this is going to add instances? On what basis is going to remove instances? And other things. So let's quickly go ahead and click on create launch configuration. The limit on which parameters you are. So number of scaling groups currently, I guess, yes, maybe we have a limit of 5 or 10 or maybe a maximum of 20 as a part of free tier. But again, you can go ahead and get that increase with the help of AWS support case asking them to increase the soft limit. No, they don't have any specific limit after the soft case. Specifically, they are going to increase in small chunks. So initially it might be 20. So maybe they'll increase it to 50. After that, 50 is also not sufficient. They may increase it to 100. Slowly, they'll see your history, how you're paying the bills, how you're doing it. If everything is on time, they'll increase those soft limits for us. Yeah, charges are basis on number of data scaling groups I am going to use. So this basically they're going to check out my history, how I am using, how what am I paying things on the time or not, and basically on basis of that they are going to increase my soft limits. Today it might be 20, tomorrow it may be 30, and then 50, then 100, and so on. Okay, so quickly going down to the auto scaling groups. So first part, when we go ahead and click across here, it does ask me to go ahead and create a launch configuration, right? So step one has to be created first before I can go down to the step two. So I'll click on create launch configuration. So the launch configuration is as same as launching an EC2 instance. There's no much difference. It is again the same 6 steps that we are going to do. I'm going to choose a Linux AMI, Amazon Linux AMI as a part of the step one. In the step two, we are going to put across the instance type. Then we are going to configure the details, and then we are going to add storage and then a security group and then review it across. So let's quickly go ahead and create our launch configuration here. So I'm going to use Amazon Linux AMI. I'm going to use T2 Micro. And then the next is I'm going to give the name to my launch configuration. I'll just say my first LC. LC stands for the launch configuration.
Hello.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, here we can use different OSs for creating additional instances. Earlier we have Windows. It might be this time Linux or Unix. Can we go like this?
Yeah, we can go ahead. There's no problem.
Okay. I mean, in SAP, we are going to only with particular. Earlier, if we have Windows, we go with along 3, 4 instances. All are it might be Windows.
Mhm.
Is here any specific conditions? Not like that.
Yeah, we can create our own AMI as well, right? So that will be actually helpful so that we do not have to select the existing from any of the existing AMI. We can create our own AMI, which is as per our project requirement, and we can always select the same AMI at any point in time.
Okay, okay. If it is project specific, we can go with earlier one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So in our case here, we are going to pick up the Amazon Linux AMI, and then in the launch configuration, we are going to select the T2 Micro as a machine, which is a part of our free tier. And then I'm going to give the name to my launch configuration as my first LC. And then currently I do not have any IAM role to be associated. We'll go down to the advanced detail sections, and I'm going to leave this default, the kernel ID and the RAM disk ID. I'll leave it as a default. In the user data, let's put across some details. So I'm going to make this into a web server. So I'll use this one to put across some bootstrap script. Shebang slash bin slash bash. See if I have got something. So I have one part of Bootstrap script ready. I'll just make a use of it and explain you what are we doing in here. So I'm going to execute all the commands at a root level using the bash script. And the first command I'm going to write is yum update -y, which is going to help me across to update all the security patches. Then we are going to install Apache, that is httpd yum install httpd -y, and then we are going to change our directory path to var www html. And once we change to specific path, I'm going to go ahead and create a file with the name index.html, which is going to be the home page of my web server. I'll just go ahead and write here auto scaling groups so that we come to know that this is my web page from the EC2 instance auto scaling groups. I'll just go ahead and copy the same kind of line here, and so I'm also going to create one more file here, which is going to be a part of healthy.html, which is going to help my load balancer to check the status of this EC2 instance, whether it is healthy or not. How does the load balancer come to know? So it is always going to keep a check on this file, that is healthy.html file, whether it is responding or not. And then I'm going to ensure that Apache service is going to start through, and then we can also ensure that Apache is always up and running. So specifically in terms of the kernel ID, so there are a lot of different versions of the kernels, right? So there might be sometimes a requirement, as just Shiva asked some question before, can we choose an AMI which could be required for my SAP system? Similarly, some softwares or some patches of the Linux or Unix systems work with better with a specific version of kernel ID. So if you want to choose that specific kernel ID here or the RAM disk ID, you will be able to choose. Like if I'm on Ubuntu and I want to use some specific kernel ID, so usually the kernel IDs will be with 3 dot or something else. So the current version of the kernel is, I guess, 3.4 or something. Yeah, currently the stable one is 4.13, which has been a little while now. So some we may be using different versions of the kernel IDs depending upon the kind of implementation that we want to do across. So in case if you want to go ahead and change that, you'll be able to do. So available kernels that you can keep use for your instance. Kernels help to keep your instance up to date with the security fixes and the updates. So like for every software, we get our own updates, right? So when we were using, let's say, Adobe Acrobat Reader, initially it was 1.0 version. Today it is like around 10 or 11, something as such, right? So even the Oracle database, when we talk about, so each and every software that we are specifically using, they have a version. Similarly, how does the Linux environment grow across? It is with the help of kernel ID. So whatever security updates or patches are going to come up, they are released in terms of kernel IDs. So kernels help you to keep update your instance with up-to-date security fixes and updates, and allow you to use the functionality provided by the new distributions, and to use secure specialty applications that have unique timing requirements. And in terms of RAM, a RAM disk that contains necessary drivers such as Zen drivers or video drivers to make the chosen kernel work. Sometimes whenever we are going to choose a specific kernel, we may be using different versions of the kernel ID. So in case if you want to choose a specific kernel ID, you will be able to choose that specific kernel ID using the Can you guys hear me now? There was a power disconnection, so the screen was stuck actually. Okay, so we were discussing about the kernel ID and the RAM disk ID. So specifically, as our version of softwares are being upgraded, similarly, if the Linux or the Unix environment has to be upgraded, it is with the help of kernel ID we come to know what all new features have been added or something as such. Now, specifically, there might be a case when I want to work on the specific kernel ID for specific software, because there might be some age-old softwares which might not work on the newer Linux kernel versions, and I might want to use the old one itself as part of my project requirement, and that might be requiring a specific RAM disk ID as well. Like if I require extra RAM or disk ID for which supports that specific kernel ID, then I will be able to use it across. Now coming back to the user data, so we are just trying to create a couple of files under the directory, that is var www.html, that is with the name index.html and the healthy.html, and then I'm going to quickly go and start the Apache service and ensure that the Apache service is always up and running. Now the last one, if you see here, it says IP address type. So there are three different options that we get. So in case if I'm going to use the default VPC itself, then I'm going to use the first option itself, which says only assign a public IP address to the instances launched in the default VPC and the subnet. So for the any instance that get launched in the default VPC and the default subnet, automatically the IP address is going to be tagged across. And in case if I'm using my own VPC, then I'm going to use this assign a public IP address to every instance. So if it is going to be a web server, then I'm going to use this option in case of web server with my own VPC. So that will be assign a public IP address to every instance. And the third one is do not assign public IP addresses to any instances. Right? So it clearly says this option only affects the instances launched in an Amazon VPC. So if you are going to use your own VPC, then you may decide whether you want to have a public IP address or not. So in our case, since you're using the default, I'm going to keep it at the first step, which is going to assign the public IP address for each and every instance that is being launched with the help of this launch configuration. I'll go ahead and click on add storage. Now in the part of add storage, I'm going to go ahead and pick up the root volume with a size of 8 GB and the general purpose SSD, and then configure the security group. I'm going to keep it behind the SSH, which has got port number 22 opened up, as well as the set web server, which has got HTTP and HTTPS protocols opened up. I'll quickly go ahead and say review. So in the step of first part of launch configuration, what did we do? We selected the AMI and then the instance type, and then in the launch configuration details, we have mentioned about the name of our launch configuration, and then we included a small user data, and then we went ahead for the storage part and then the security groups. Let's quickly go ahead and say create launch configuration. I'm going to make use of the key pair, that is Virginia key pair, which is already with me in my system, and I'll now say create launch configuration. So this actually helps me to create launch configuration. Now if you see, we are going to create the step number 2, that is auto scaling group, and this auto scaling group is automatically tagged to the launch configuration my first LC, which we have just created. Now it is going to ask me what is the name of this auto scaling group. I'll just say my first ASG. So this is the name of my auto scaling group, and here it is asking me how many instances I would like to start with. What is the minimum number of instances that you would like to have? I'll say I want to start with a minimum of 2 instances, and this is going to be a part of my default VPC. So in North Virginia, I have got 6 availability zones. So I'm going to select all of them. Now, when I say start with two instances, automatically the two instances are going to be a part of two different availability zones. And even if I say six instances, all the six instances are going to be a part of six different availability zones in this case, because auto scaling has got the intelligence built behind it, which is always going to ensure that the instances are launched in different availability zones. Now, if I go ahead and say 7, in that case, yes, it has to launch one EC2 instance in extra in already running availability zone. But in most of the cases, it does make a decision of seeing that the instances are in different availability zone. So if I go ahead and say 9, so three of the subnets are going to get two EC2 instances in the running mode, and other three are going to get single instance in the running mode. Yes, in case if we are trying to do this complete portion of lab in different region, then that autoscaling is going to use reference for the region. Since we are currently doing in North Virginia, which has got 6 availability zones, it is showing up all the 6 of them in the part of this subnet section. If I'm using Mumbai, it will be showing only 2 options, since it has got only 2 availability zones and 2 subnets. If I go to Tokyo, it has got 3 subnets, 3 availability zones. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 2 instances here. I'll scroll down the page and you will be able to see the advanced detail sections. Click on this. Now we have just created one of the load balancer a little while before the start of this auto scaling group. So I would say here that I would like to learn how to receive the traffic from one or other load balancer. I'll click on this and it's going to ask me if it is a classic load balancer or a application load balancer. So if it is application load balancer, we are going to use target groups. If it is a classic load balancer, I'm going to use a load balancer which we have just spinned up, that is my classic LB in this case. No, we cannot include two different regions at the same time in the auto scaling group. It can be only a part of one single region, because load balancer will not be able to balance the load between the two different regions. It is only between between the different availability zones will be able to manage the load. I'll scroll the page a little more and we will be able to see that my classic load balancer is being displayed as a part of it. This one, I have selected the classic LB, and then the health check type. I'm actually going to conduct the health check on the ELB, that is on my load balancer, whether it is working, whether it is working on fine or not. And the ELB is going to in turn check whether my instances are healthy or not. So that health check I'm going to conduct with the help of auto scaling group on the ELB, and the ELB is in turn going to conduct my health checks on the EC2 with the help of that health check configuration that we have done. Now there is something again called as health grace period. So health grace period is basically the length of time that auto scaling waits before an instance health status. So specifically, as I said, we are going to check out the health status of each of the EC2 instances with the help of load balancer. Now, if some instance is not working fine, so auto scaling group has to go ahead and add the new instance so that my end users are not affected, right? So how much time do we have to really wait if the instance goes wrong, or let's say gets corrupted or something as such? So here we have to define the time, the length of time that autoscaling waits before checking an instance health status. The grace period begins when the instance comes into service. If the no value is provided, then the default value of 300 seconds will be used. Enter 0 or 0 for no grace period. So in most of the cases, we will usually have the grace period as almost 150 or 120 seconds. So usually what happens is sometimes it may happen that my system has gone down due to some or the other reason, or it has been restarted automatically. So the restart will take effect in maximum of 2 to 3 minutes, right? So within 2 to 3 minutes, my instance will be automatically up and running. So before this autoscaling group goes and destroys the existing instance and adds a new instance because there was some problem with the existing one, I'm going to wait for so much amount of time. So that is the health grace period. And then monitoring, we are basically going to pick up the basic monitoring itself. So in case if you want to have a monitoring which is at every 1 minute frequency, you have to go for the detailed monitoring metrics, which is again going to attract the cost. So as a part of our feed here, I'm just going to keep it simple with the basic monitoring. And then the instance protection. The target groups is basically part of application load balancer. So we are going to learn about the application load balancer in the upcoming sections yet. So again, then thereafter we'll come back to this section to see how the auto scaling can be configured across with the help of target groups. So instance protection is basically if you want to enable the protection of the EC2 instances so that no one will be having the authority to directly accidentally close or terminate them, then you can go ahead and protect them with the help of instance protection flag here. So currently I'm going to leave it blank, which is going to be false in this case, so that we will be able to close the instances if you want to, or in case if you want to protect them from any accidental ways, you can go ahead and enable this flag to true. So just go ahead and configure scaling policies. Now this is the most important part where the auto scaling plays a role. So as we all know, scaling policies, so it is going to scale my system up, scale my system down depending upon the load that is being experienced. So if there are 1,000 users who are trying to access my web servers, so initially two EC2 instances might be enough for them to serve. But let's say if it becomes from 1,000 to lakhs of users, then how I'm going to manage them? So this scaling policies is a place where I'll be able to adjust the capacity. So I'm going to use a scaling policies here, and then it says initially I'm going to keep it as 2, and maximum it can go up to how many? So I'll say maximum, let it go up to 6 EC2 instances. So that is the size I'm going to define for my auto scaling group. So minimum it is going to be having always 2 instances running, and maximum it can go up to is 6 depending upon the load. Now let's go ahead and configure the scaling policies. I'm going to go ahead and click on the scale the auto scaling group policies using the simple or the step scaling policies. I'm going to click on this. Now let's go ahead and configure our policies. So first is on what basis you want to increase the group size, and the second is on what basis you want to decrease the group size. So we'll first configure the group size, which is of the increase. Now the name of the group is increase group size, and the alarm that is going to be executed. So on what basis I'm going to increase the size of the group. So first we need to create an alarm. I'll click on add new alarm. Now in this case here, first is we'll put across alarm. So whenever the average of CPU utilization, so I'm going to consider about the CPU utilization of the EC2 instance. So if the average of CPU utilization is greater than or equal to, let's say 50% for a consecutive period of 5 minutes. So here you can select consecutive period. So if the instance utilization in terms of CPU is more than 50% or equal to 50% for a consecutive period of 5 minutes, then I'm going to trigger this alarm of high CPU utilization. And here I can also configure where it should send a notification to me. So currently I have got a couple of notifiers. So if you do not have one, just click on create and then just say ASG notifier. ASG is basically auto scaling group, and then I'm going to create a group with the name ASG notifier, and then just go ahead and confirm your name here. Sorry, this is your email ID. So now you're going to get all the notifications to this email ID. Whenever this auto scaling group is going to add the instances, remove the instances, all those notifications will be basically sent across. So what did we do in this step? We have basically created an alarm which says whenever average of CPU utilization is greater than 50% for a consecutive period of 5 minutes, I'm going to trigger this high CPU utilization alarm, and it is also going to send me a notification to this email ID. So I'll just say create alarm, and whenever this alarm is being triggered, what should happen? It should basically go ahead and add one EC2 instance automatically. Then you can also put across this timer for the instance to warm up. So if there is a lot of bootstrap script and other things, so you can say how many seconds it has to wait for the warm up after each step. So for currently I'll leave it as default, and decrease group size. So again, in the case of decrease group size, I have to create an alarm and say on what basis it is going to decrease the EC2 instances. So I'm going to click on add new alarm. Again, we are going to use the ASG notifier, which is going to send an email to my ID whenever there is a hit in the CPU utilization. So I'm, in this case now, since we are going to decrease the size, I'm going to say average of CPU utilization less than or equal to, let's say if it is 3%. So if it is less than 3% for a consecutive period of 15 minutes, for continuously 15 minutes, if it is less than 3%, then I can understand that the system is not in use anymore. So I can straight away go ahead and trigger this alarm as low CPU utilization and send an email to this ID. And then I'm going to say that action should be removing one EC2 instance. So basically we are trying to scale the policies on what basis the auto scaling group should increase or decrease the group size. So initially I'm starting with the 2, and maximum it can go up to is 6. So with the help of this increased group size, I can maximum go up to 6 EC2 instances. And what is the alarm we have added? So the alarm is basically whenever one instance is having the hit on the CPU utilization for more than 50% for consecutively 300 seconds, I'm going to add a one new EC2 instance. And similarly, in case of decreased group size, if the CPU utilization of any instance is less than 3% for 900 consecutive seconds, then I'm going to remove the instances. So now again, let's just look out what did we do in the scaling policies. So scaling policies is a place where I'm going to tell my auto scaling group on what basis it has to scale up or what basis it has to scale down. Now let's look at this specific example. Here, if you see, I have got a load balancer, and this is the DNS of my web server, that is flipkart.com. Initially, I had a size of 2 instances to be running all the time. Now the load has actually increased on this load balancer, but load balancer can only balance the load, but someone has to tell the load balancer that if the load is higher, then go ahead and add the new EC2 instance. So that is basically done with the help of auto scaling groups. Now on what basis I am going to add the new EC2 instance here? So let's say the load is now increasing, I'm going to add a new EC2 instance. So I added one instance, and still the load is increasing, I have added one more. So now the group of 2 instances has become a group of 4 instances. So whenever the load is going to decrease at night, again it is going to remove them. Okay, so whenever the load decreases, it is going to remove these instances back, and the size will be again only the 2 EC2 instances. So how did we configure the scaling policies? So basically there are two things, that is, one is increase group size and the decrease group size. On what basis it should increase, on what basis it should decrease. So in the increased group size, we have actually created an alarm which is going to track the CPU utilization of each and every instance which is there a part of auto scaling group. So currently we have two instances which are going to run at a minimum level. So for both the instances, it's going to track the CPU utilization. If it is greater than 50% for consecutively 5 minutes, then I'm going to add one new EC2 instance. Similarly, for the decreased group size, I'm going to track the CPU utilization. If it is less than 3% for consecutively 15 minutes or the 900 seconds, then I'm going to remove the one instance here. So any questions or doubts here on the auto scaling policies? Is it clear? Shiva, Divya? I didn't get your doubt, Rahul. Okay, this instance need. Now, sometimes any new EC2 instance that we are going to launch might require a little time. So let's say if there's a bootstrap script that needs to be executed, so it may take a little while for the instance to launch and the bootstrap script to get executed. And then if you remember in our case here, the bootstrap script is very small, but in the real time it can be something much more bigger than this. So it is basically going to create a new file with the name healthy.html, and that healthy.html is again going to take a little while for the load balancer to check and say that this instance is healthy, right? So before it can go ahead and add one more EC2 instance, like already CPU utilization is hit at 50%, but it is anyway going to add the new instance. Here I'm going to say that it has to wait for minimum of 300 seconds before it can go ahead and add one more EC2 instance, because it takes a little while for the new instance to launch, the health checks to be performed, and then it is declared as healthy now, and it is currently part of load balancer and is working currently fine. So for all these steps to execute and declare it to be healthy, it may take a little while. So here we can define what is the amount of time that instance needs to wait whenever the new EC2 instance is already added by a scaling group for the increased group size. Okay, and auto fetch. Yeah, so whenever I'm going to create this auto scaling group, so since we still have two more steps, so the moment I say create auto scaling group, automatically two instances are going to be launched. I do not have to create any instances anymore. Automatically, this group, whenever I say create, it is going to start with two EC2 instances. I will not go to EC2 section to say launch instance anymore. I just need to create launch configuration and the auto scaling policies, which are going to trigger the minimum number of EC2 instances. So let's quickly go ahead and now configure the notifications. So we have already configured a notification in the last step in terms of alarm. Now let's say you want to get a notification at each and every time whenever there's a launch of new system, whenever there's a termination of existing systems, or if any of the systems fails to launch, or if any of the system fails to terminate. So if you want to get a notification on all of these parameters, specifically we are going to use this ASG notifier as a notification group, to which it is going to send an email notification whenever there is a launch, terminate, fail to launch, or fail to terminate across. So here in this specific case, we are basically trying to configure the notification parts. And finally, the tags, I'm going to say name, my first ASG, and then say review. And now if I go ahead and click on create autoscaling group, you will see that it is automatically going to launch two EC2 instances and tag it to my existing load balancer. So let's go ahead and check it out in the instance dashboard. So there we go. We see two EC2 instances automatically launched, and they are going to be automatically tagged to the load balancer. I'll also open the load balancer in the new tab here. So this is my classic load balancer, which we already have. If I click on the instance section, you see two instances which just got launched with the help of autoscaling group. Both of them are basically tagged here, and you can see that the tags that I have actually applied to the autoscaling group are now given to the EC2 instances. So this is the way I'll be able to easily identify that these instances are basically launched by my autoscaling group. I didn't go to launch instance to launch it anymore. My autoscaling group has automatically launched using the launch configuration. And you see one of them is already in service. Second one has failed the health check. I'll just refresh it. There we go. Both of them are in service now. And so if I pick up this DNS name, you see I'm able to get my web page. So even if I keep refreshing, I'll never be able to know which server I'm actually being redirected to. So as in the last part of the lab, we did check that the classic load balancer is going to alternatively send the EC2 instances with the traffic, right? So one time it may go to the server which is in our case it is in 1E and 1F. So one time it is going to send a request to the server in 1E, and sometime it is going to send a request to the server in 1F. But since both of them have the same configuration, I'll never be able to know which server we are basically being redirected to. The same happens with the Flipkart or Amazon. So whenever you're going to click on flipkart.com, you'll never know which server you're basically being redirected to. It might have multiple servers running behind the scene in order to ensure that the server is up and running all the time. So any questions here on the autoscaling group part? Divya, Rahul, and Shiva? So I'll show you some more things before we close for the day. Now let's say one of the instances got corrupted and it went into stop mode, or let's say it got in problem and it went off in a stopping mode. So as we all know that autoscaling group has got minimum number of instances to be running is 2. So let's see how are we going to get a email, how are we going to see that the new issue instance gets added up here. So in no time, the autoscaling group is going to add across the new EC2 instance in this section here. So currently the instance is in stop state. Now the autoscaling group will get a update that one of the instance has been gone down, and my load balancer is currently having only one EC2 instance. You see, whichever is out of service, it is going to remove it off from here itself. It will remove this instance with the name DEF, which is out of service, because it knows that if it is not working for 150 seconds, it will straight away remove this instance from this classic load balancer group. It will add a new one, and then it will tag that one to this group. Let's see. You see, it has been removed now, and we will be able to see that the new instance is already in launching phase. Yeah, now it will come into launching phase. First, it removes it from the load balancer, then it adds a new instance here, which is going to be tagged to the load balancer. There we go. The new instance with the D48C is being launched, which is in pending state. The moment it is going to come down the running state, it will be displayed onto my load balancer. Let's refresh this. It is just going to take a couple of more seconds. Yeah, now it is in running mode. You should be able to see the instance here. Yeah, there we go. The D48C instance has now actually come into the load balancer. Currently, it is out of service. It is going to be taking a toll on the health check. So it is going to check for the healthy.html file, and if it works fine, it will be in service. There we go. So both of them are in service. So we were just able to see that in last 2 minutes, I was able to destroy one instance, and it actually it was in terminated state now. I just stopped the instance, but since it was not working, auto scaling group has actually terminated it completely, and it has launched a new EC2 instance and tagged it back to the load balancers so that our systems are always working fine. And lastly, before we close for the day, always remember whenever you're trying to do any of these lab portions, just go ahead and remove all the EC2 instances or the resources once you're done with it. Now in my case, if I go to the instance section and try to destroy any of the EC2 instance, it is still going to add the instances because they are launched with the help of autoscaling group, right? So if I have to remove all the instances which are appearing in this section, all I have to do is click on actions and delete this autoscaling group. So the moment I delete the autoscaling group, it is also going to remove my EC2 instances automatically from here, right? We will see that these two EC2 instances are going to go down in no time. So any questions or doubts before we close for the day?
About,
Yeah, hi.
yeah. If it is in a maintenance mode, I mean like weekly maintenances, we go to shutdown and some parameters we are going to add it, right?
Mhm.
At that moment also, is it going to add new instances here? Or
Yeah.
specifically, if we have two instances here, we are
Mhm.
going to make it down both at a moment, and at
Mhm.
that time, will it get additional two instances here?
Yeah, so what we do is basically in this case, the launch configuration, if you remember,
Yeah.
I'll actually create a new launch configuration. Okay, so I'll create a new AMI which is in place with it. Okay, and for the existing auto scaling group, currently I have deleted it across. So for the existing auto scaling group, I do get an option to edit it. So I can change my launch configuration at any moment of time. That's the reason you will see that the Flipkart or the Amazon will never go down. So what they're actually trying to do in behind the scene is they have already created a new launch configuration which has got the new updates, new AMI, all the things are in place. So for the existing auto scaling group, they are going to change the launch configuration itself.
Okay.
Right? So if they have changed the launch configuration, they will actually destroy the two EC2 instances which are currently running, like I have done for the one of them, right? So they'll actually stop one after the other so that the new launch configuration is going to add a new EC2 instance behind the scene. So the end users will never see that the servers went down, but automatically the servers got upgraded to the new AMI or the new configurations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. How about Divya and all? Any more questions before we close for the day? Still in the auto scaling, we have a couple of more things to learn about. So I'll come to that on terms of exam tips. Actually, we have the scheduled based auto scaling groups. So specifically, we can actually schedule this group to start at every day at so and so point of time. So that we are going to discuss in the next part of the class. So auto scaling properties, we have just done half the way. So some more things are to be discussed. Okay, I'll just have a word with the visual part team to help you get to the last part of the video that we had on Saturday. Sure, then we'll close the session here for the day and we'll discuss on few more things about the auto scaling and the load balancers in the next part of our topic, and we close this section of auto scaling and the load balancers here. Thanks all, have a great day, and we'll meet back again tomorrow at the same time.